Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football, the most accurate podcast of the off season, because we finally made it. I'm your host, as always, John Daigle, joined today, friend in life, a man who also just put in his final rankings changes of the week, none other than John Paulsen. Paulsen, how's it going?
Yeah, probably not the last changes of the week, but definitely a big sweep of changes with everything that's happened in the last couple of days with the cut downs and some injuries and stuff like that. I'm also happy to have my friend. This is an especially accurate episode of the most accurate podcast because we have a good friend of mine, Pat Fitzmaurice, on the podcast today. He's won the Fantasy Pros most accurate expert, and Fantasy Pros decided to go ahead and hire him. So welcome to the podcast, Pat.
Thanks for having me, John. I mean, I feel pretty lucky. I'm here with my longtime friend from southeastern Wisconsin, fellow cheesehead, and my buddy John Daigle I'm seeing for the second time in less than a week after drafting together at a Chicago bar last week. And we're about to get football. 8 days till the NFL and a couple days till we get full-on college football. I mean, how lucky can one guy get?
And you and I are also about to make asses of each other in front of one another at the golf rounds a few Saturday mornings in the Chicago area. So, yes, everything going quite well. But, gentlemen, we have to close out a few final news items before the offseason is officially done. We did, fortunately, avoid injuries to most top 50, top 75 players. So I think we actually got away quite easily in this offseason and preseason. But overall, one of the biggest news moments, that was the unfortunate event with Brian Robinson getting shot multiple times into his lower body over the weekend in a carjacking. He, fortunately, is doing well post-injury, so much so he remains on Washington's active roster rather than being put on IR or the PUP list. And this is important because, one, he's healthy. Let's start there. But two, on Underdog in particular, what we're seeing now, and we know this not only from our 4for4 tool, Underdog ADP, but also just the fact that at 4for4.com/underdog, you can see the rankings adjustments and what is happening to projections on the fly. And that is that Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissic's ADPs have actually been the number 1 and 2 most fluctuated ADPs at Underdog over the last 96 hours. Gibson headed for the beginning of the 7th round in particular, and McKissic now becoming a confident option for any tournament, even if we're talking about 16-round PPR home leagues. Paulsen, I want to start with you. What does this news do in your mind for Gibson and McKissic in drafts?
So could you refine that ADP a little bit for me? Because when I looked, it went from pick 97 for Gibson to pick 92, but I might have been looking at the last week. You said 96 hours. So could you tell me exactly where his ADP is landing?
That's it. 90-92, mid-7th. I would imagine he moves up to the beginning of the 7th round.
But yeah, okay. So I thought it was interesting because I was writing this situation up, and of course Robinson's ADP has dropped 39 spots, which is understandable. But usually in this situation, you see somebody else's ADP in the backfield rise commensurately, and it really hasn't happened yet for Gibson. I don't think that it seems like fantasy managers are out on Robinson for understandable reasons, but aren't really totally sold on Gibson, getting all those touches back, which it looks like he will. So he is now kind of a value, and I think in the 7th, 6th round. I mean, I've talked about Gibson before. He was really one of the most intriguing players coming into this offseason because he went from maybe flirting with top 5 value when J.D. McKissic signed with the Bills, and then unsigned with the Bills, or didn't sign with the Bills, but agreed to terms with the Bills, and then reneged on that. And then they drafted Robinson. They started talking about Ron Rivera started ruminating about D'Angelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart backfields from his days in Carolina. And then he fumbles in preseason, and all of a sudden he's working out with special teams, and he's dropped. But this is normally a guy we're tripping over to try to draft. I mean, he's young. He's got 2 top 13 finishes on his resume. He's talented. He's got dual threat ability, all those things. And now he's suddenly becoming a little bit of a value again. I don't know. Like, I passed on him in a recent draft. I regret it a little bit. I thought maybe he would make it back to me, but he didn't. And I'm wondering, Pat, do you, what round do you think you feel comfortable with Antonio Gibson right now, knowing that, Robinson is probably going to miss about half the season? I mean, things I'm reading, 6 to 8 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks, that seems to be the recovery timeline for him.
Yeah, and you almost don't need to force it with Gibson just because there's been such a preponderance of negative news with him that even this Robinson situation doesn't seem to be saving his image with fantasy managers. So, like, I'd feel comfortable taking him somewhere in the 6th and might actually target him and kind of have some regret that I didn't do that earlier in a best ball when I had the opportunity. Like you said it, John. I mean, here's this guy who is as big and as fast as Jonathan Taylor, who has the pass catching background that we like as a former college receiver, who scored double-digit touchdowns his first 2 years in the league, who's tough enough to have played with a crack in his shin bone last year, and like everyone's running away from him, like just like I'm sitting here on the Antonio Gibson bandwagon reading a magazine as people run past me to get to the exit, and like that was even before the Robinson shooting. Like I was like, okay, if people are gonna let me grab him in the 8th or 9th round, I'll take him, and just kind of make the bet on talent. Like obviously, Rivera has some issues with the fumbling problem, and I get it. But with a lot of guys like Tiki Barber early in his career, fumbles were a problem until they weren't. And, John, as a Packer fan, you and I know that like Devontae Adams has had a huge drops problem his first couple of years in the league. Like, I don't think it's one of those chronic things that like never goes away for most guys. There's some guys. There's the who was the Giants guy, Wilson, who fumbled his way out of the league.
Was it Adrian Wilson?
Oh man,
Was it David Wilson?
David Wilson. That's it.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Sorry,
I was guessing
that up, not knowing the name and potentially making all three of us look bad, but you saved the day, John. So, I don't know. I'm still kind of in on Antonio Gibson, and now with the speculation that Robinson might not be back till like late October at the earliest. Maybe November, and then is probably going to need some time to get his stamina back up and work back in with a reduced snap count. Like, I'm feeling pretty confident about grabbing Gibson, at his still depressed ADP.
I think we are in the exact situation we were last year. Whenever through week 12, while McKissick was healthy, that's when McKissick actually outsnapped Antonio Gibson 17-1 on 3rd down in that stretch. Also remember that the last 2 years in 25 appearances with Gibson, McKissick has averaged 5.5 targets per game. So I think we're back in that same exact spot where I don't think Gibson's going to earn this pass catching role, since that's what McKissick does quite well and arguably better than him. And thus, that leads me to be much higher on McKissick and have PPR and PPR leagues. But like you said, Pat, Gibson in the 7th round really isn't stretching. It really hasn't budged from where his ADP was initially all too much, whether it be underdog or home league. So I'm totally fine still now on taking a chance on Gibson, knowing he'll still have that role, albeit not the role we wanted for him. But remember, he was a 3rd round pick last year, whereas now we get that role for the 7th round pick, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I would just add that you're looking at the splits with Gibson with McKissick, and you're exactly right about the passing role. It's 4.4 targets per game without McKissick, 2.7 targets per game with McKissick for Gibson last year. However, 19 touches for Gibson with McKissick, 18.2 touches without. So, not a big difference in terms of total touches. And, to get a player that has that sort of floor in the 6th or 7th round, I think it's a good strategy. And it also adds, like, everybody knows that I'm on Chase Edmonds in the 7th round. In fact, the guy in my home league drafted him in the 6th round just to spite me, I think. But this is another option there for owners in the 6th or the managers in the 6th or 7th round. If they miss out on Edmonds, maybe you grab Gibson instead.
And we will discuss Chase Edmonds here in a bit. Moving on, though, to another situation that was somewhat shocking in the past 48 hours, and that is Jimmy Garoppolo having his contract restructured to still remain the league's highest paid backup, but more importantly, now he can reach up to $10 million in playing time incentives. Thus, if he doesn't play, the team doesn't have to pay him that amount. And more importantly, he is now tradable, whereas his previous contract prior to getting restructured, no one was going to ever bite the bullet on that whatsoever. And so where do you stand now, Paulsen, in your rankings and your confidence level in Trey Lance starting all year?
I don't think this has too much of an impact on him, other than the fact that if they do get off to a slow start, maybe they go 1-3 or 1-4, and he's struggling, the chances that they might pull him for Jimmy G to sort of save the season, those obviously go up because Jimmy G's on the roster. I mean, the fact that he might, they have a competent backup quarterback there, certainly makes it more likely that might happen. I think there's a small chance of that happening. It seems like everything is pointed to them moving on this offseason, and they're ready for the Trey Lance era to begin. Pat, I know you have some thoughts on Trey Lance in this situation. Why don't you go ahead, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, the re-signing of Jimmy G has me so panicked that I dropped Lance from 8th to 9th behind Russell Wilson. I find it kind of amusing that people think Jimmy G poses this existential threat to Lance's season when the 49ers were willing to throw around multiple first-round draft picks to acquire Jimmy G's successor. And I know Lance has not had a great training camp or preseason. I think that maybe that could happen, John, that they could bench him early if Lance was just such a disaster, and maybe they think they could keep their championship window pried open with Jimmy G at the helm if Lance is so bad early in the season. But I kind of don't think that's going to happen, and I still think we should look at the potential upside here, that even if Lance is not very good as a passer and averages 190 passing yards and one touchdown pass a game, that there's still so much upside here because he's probably going to average something around 50 rushing yards a game and is a guy who could punch in 6, 7, 8, 9 touchdown runs this year. He's got that sort of rushing upside and the chance to be this year's Jalen Hurts. So, I mean, in a lot of home leagues, he's going to slip because people are going to be panicky about this Jimmy G thing and lose their sleeper enthusiasm for Lance. But if every other league mate in a 12-team league has picked a quarterback and Lance is still sitting there on the board, please take Trey Lance. Don't take Kirk Cousins. If you take Kirk Cousins, you are going to be outscored at quarterback most weeks, despite this, idea that Kevin O'Connell is going to turn him into the new Kurt Warner leading the greatest show on turf. It's not going to happen. Kirk Cousins is an average quarterback and frankly below average if it's on a big stage, as John knows. So take Lance, go for the plausible upside. And if it is in the unlikely scenario that it is a disaster with him, you can drop him and get stream the position. But you owe it to yourself to take that chance with Lance, especially now that the price is starting to drop a little.
I do think he is a key to drafting this year because whereas I'm still more than comfortable and I'm literally waiting for the 6th, 7th round to draft either Kyler Murray or Jalen Hurts, knowing they have QB overall 1 potential in their range of outcomes, whereas I don't think the other players, Devonta Smith, Adam Thielen, Allen Lazard, list goes on in that range, are worthy of being drafted over those 2 individuals at quarterback. If I wait beyond then, because someone slips a wide receiver, a Chase Edmonds, that for some reason we know our projections and the situation we are higher on than the rest of our league mates, that's when I then wait, knowing I can grab Trey Lance a round or 2 later. So I think he is a key piece, whether I move him up or down because of this news isn't the big picture answer, right? And so that's why I still am very high on him in the 8th, 9th round, trying to be ahead at least 1 full round of my league mates when drafting him. Another surprising release, surprising news moment from Cut Down Day is that if we haven't already talked about Dameon Pierce enough over the last 2 weeks, we've now seen Paulsen that Marlon Mack was outright released, re-signed with the team's practice squad. that doesn't matter. What they really showed us is that they're more than willing to waive him and let him go if he signed elsewhere, because they are apparently comfortable with Dameon Pierce and Rex Burkhead and Royce Freeman to whatever extent the other two play behind the rookie. Does Pierce now move any higher for you than what you already had moved him the week prior?
Yeah, I moved him up a little bit. I'm a little slow on Pierce. I'm not jumping all over him. I think I moved him from 38 to 32 or 36 to 32, something like that. I think I might have him at 32 right now and a half PPR. I'm fine with him. I'm obviously targeting different running backs at that range in the draft. But if I end up with him, I'd be okay. This is just one of those running games that I don't want a big part of. And it's not like he's going to be a 3-down back with Rex Burkhead there. And, people laugh at that statement maybe, but Rex Burkhead is a competent passing down back and has been a pretty good runner of the football as well. And this offensive line's not good at all. The thing that is working in Pierce's favor is that he is a tackle breaker, which he's going to have to be. And he does what I've seen. It looks like he's pretty improvisational and with being able to make a guy miss when he's, met in the backfield. So he's going to need that behind this Texans offensive line, but I just don't think there's going to be a lot of rushing touchdowns here unless he is just way better than his, draft capital in terms of real world draft capital, and is able to just turn this running game around on his own. It doesn't seem like that's the case. But as a RB3, RB4, I'm okay with that. He's not a player that I'm targeting though.
Where do you stand after the 3-week run that Pierce had, Pat?
I have got him. I'm a little more bullish than John, maybe 26th or 27th, just because of the opportunity. And that's the thing. If you look at hit rates for 4th-round running backs, it's terrible. But how often do 4th-round running backs walk into situations as good as this one? And the Marlon Mack, like every time we think it can't get any better, something else happens, and now Marlon Mack is out of the way. So, Daigle, you and I were in a draft last week where Pierce went 43rd overall, and it was a super flex draft. I mean, that's like, I don't know if he gets that high in every draft. I kind of hope not. But like, there's some major helium here with his ADP, and I can understand it. Like the opportunity is good, but as John points out, it's not going to be in a great offense. I think we'd probably be happy to get 7 touchdowns out of him this year, but the more realistic number is probably something like 4 or 5. But, if he is getting reliably 15 touches a game, and that's the thing, like everyone was kind of rosy about his outlook. Even there were truthers even right after he got drafted. But now that we know he's probably going to be getting enough touches every week that you can justify starting him in your RB2 or flex spot. That's a big difference maker. So I think now you can justify taking him in the 6th round or so, perhaps. Maybe not 43rd overall in a super flex league, but this is a guy you can start in week 1.
I recently saw him in an FFPC main event, so $2,000 entry league, go in the 4th round in that tier breaker range before Breece Hall even went. And then, of course, before J.K. Dobbins, Elijah Mitchell, A.J. Dillon, that range that has been shoved up now because no one wants to take Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, those players. And I do think Pierce offers more confident weekly RB2 value, RB2 touches than a Breece Hall, than a J.K. Dobbins. We'll talk about those in a second. But overall, it's still a matter of coming down to asking what his ceiling is in the range of players that are still existing in your league whenever you walk up to draft him. Fortunately, on Yahoo, on Sleeper, I've done enough leagues now throughout the offseason in the past couple weeks that he's still buried, especially on Sleeper. You have to scroll down quite a bit to star him just to remember to draft him ahead of everyone. And so it is possible to get him at a value if your league hasn't been paying attention, especially in the last week of the preseason. But overall, it is high capital. And I'm not saying, Paulsen, that I don't want to use it, because I think he should be jammed into the dead zone range along with Dillon, Hall, those players. But at the same time, I do want to make sure I look around and ask, is he the highest ceiling possible here? Or is there still that tier 2 of wide receivers who fell down the board? Because, of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, Allen Robinson could easily outscore Pierce and be much more valuable in my flex position.
Yeah, According to FantasyMojo.com, an excellent site that compiles
Yep.
FFPC data, he's at 6-1 now, ahead of Cam Akers, David Montgomery, J.K. Dobbins, Chase Edmonds, Tony Pollard, and Elijah Mitchell. So he's moved ahead of all those guys who have, I would say, except for Pollard, seem to have at least have the lead in their backfields, pretty much guaranteed, if not bell cow type stuff with David Montgomery and perhaps Mitchell. So to me, it's a little pricey given that offense. I mean, I'd much rather have like an Elijah Mitchell who's going a full round later than a Pierce, but that's me.
Elijah Mitchell, too, because no other 49ers running back was able to separate themselves as someone who can compete for that backfield during the entire preseason, while Elijah Mitchell was still sidelined. So great news for Elijah Mitchell in that zone. Another running back piece of information is that Ty Montgomery was actually carted off while rotating in drives with Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris in the team's final preseason game when their offense looked just a disaster. But that's not the point here. The point is Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris continue catching steam, Stevenson in particular. Pat, let's start with you on this one. Where do you now have Stevenson ranked in the final weekend of regular season drafts?
Oh boy, he's right there with Dameon Pierce. I think he's one spot ahead of Dameon Pierce, so 25 or 26 at running back. And he's been a guy I have gotten in a lot of best balls and a lot of early drafts. And now he's probably getting priced out of my range in a lot of leagues. I find that, just before I can pull the trigger, he's going. So this certainly helps him because he has a pass-catching skill set, kind of strange for a guy who I think in college played as big as like 250 pounds, but he does have like nifty feet and soft hands, so he could be that guy. It'll be interesting to see if they do want him to be their passing down back or if they try to get Pierre Strong into that role. And I think now in deeper leagues, maybe Strong becomes a late round possibility. Have to be a pretty deep league though. Yeah, I like Stevenson to begin with, but now I think everyone likes Stevenson, which is the big problem.
And that's how I've been handling it, Paulsen, is all offseason, just taking the one at the discount, knowing it's an ambiguous situation, especially after Damian Harris was the one used for 30-plus touches inside the 10 last year, not Ramondre Stevenson. And now what's happened is that Damian Harrison is the screaming value compared to Stevenson.
Yeah, I was going to mention that he's going in the 9th round now. And it basically has flipped with Stevenson, and that's understandable to a degree. I mentioned earlier when one player in the backfield rises, another one tends to drop. But in this situation, you've got a player who in Harris, who was the RB13 last year, scored a ton of touchdowns, and he could be used on passing downs as well. Bill Belichick, everything's lost. The thing that's lost on the Bill Belichick talking about Stevenson's pass catching is that he said basically the same thing about Harris, is that they're looking at all 3 downs for both of those players there. And when they were playing in the preseason, those players were getting series and were in on 3rd down, just kind of rotating series by series, not by what down, which is a little different than what they've been doing in the past. I think the one concern with New England, though, is that this offense has struggled in the preseason, and we don't know what we're going to get out of it. I mean, are they going to have 10, 15 rushing touchdowns this year like they did last year or whatever it was? Harris had 15, I think, on his own. But is this offense going to take a step back? They don't have a true offensive mind as an offensive coordinator. They're tag teaming that role, and so far it doesn't look like they're having much success with it. I have confidence in Bill Belichick to sort of right the ship, but it might be a slow September. It could be a slow September for both these players, but I think they both have some upside in PPR formats with Montgomery sideline, because he was looking like he might be that 3rd down James White type player for them.
One can definitely get there. I still want to remind everyone, though, that we have literally a decade of evidence since 2011 under Bill Belichick with the Patriots, where none of their running backs yet in that decade-long span, have handled at least 45% of the team's carries and seen a 5% target share. It has always been a committee. And that's what I still want to bet on, is literally a decade of evidence over the passion of one individual of Ramondre Stevenson. So I will keep taking the dip and whomever it happens to. And again, right now, that's Damian Harris. You, Paulsen, though, wanted to talk about the Dolphins' backfield in particular, the Patriots' opponents in Week 1, and I think it's relevant now to discuss it since Sony Michel was surprisingly released on cut day. So your thoughts on Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert there?
Yeah, I mean, after that cut was made, I was a little bit surprised by it because it looked
Same.
like Michel, even though he wasn't having a great preseason, we saw he had 900 something total yards last year. He's not an old guy. I know his knees are a little bit older than he is, but it was really shaping up to look like he was a threat, at least for the goal line work there. He's definitely the biggest body that they had in that backfield, and now they got a bunch of 205-pound guys and a 199-pound guy. And so I do think that the Michel being released affects Edmonds in terms of his floor and his ceiling, because there's a real chance that could be the goal line back. Mostert is not a bigger player than he is. So if they do a run of committee, it's fine, I think, because Edmonds is going to see the vast majority of the catches. That's not Mostert's game. Mostert has great speed. He's definitely capable of taking 10, 12 carries, out of the backfield. But we're seeing Edmonds play a lot with Tua and looking pretty good and catching a lot of passes from him. So, I'm still very bullish on this, and I do think that touchdown upside is significantly higher now that Michel's out of the way. I just didn't agree with that analysis that it didn't matter. I think it does matter when a player that the third player they brought in free agency who had been a factor other places, is released. I think that shows some confidence either in their goal line situation or, Myles Gaskin, Sullivan Ahmed as their 3 and 4 guys.
Edmonds, Pat, has 9 career rushing touchdowns through 4 seasons and only 6 career carries inside the 5-yard line. I think it matters that Sony Michel was released a lot because it now dwindles down a situation, basically only allowing 2 players to be the goal line back as opposed to 3, and more importantly, the one we sort of favored it.
Yeah, same. I've been very slow to the Chase Edmonds party. I had him ranked in running back 3 range all off season, and I've finally got him. It's like a lower end running back 2. I think like all signs do point that way. Pretty much every off season development or training camp, preseason development has been favorable for him. He's sort of the anti-Antonio Gibson, whereas Gibson had all this negative momentum. Everything has sort of been building toward a bigger role for Chase Edmonds in what I initially thought was going to be an extremely murky backfield. And I think even if Raheem Mostert beats the odds and plays more than 12 games or so, I still think Edmonds is going to get a healthy enough dose of work that he's going to be the guy you want in there and can start week in and week out in offense that we think, I mean, as much firepower as there is at wide receiver for the Dolphins, you have to think that with McDaniel coming from San Francisco, he's going to want to run the ball. And I feel like Edmonds is the guy who probably gives them the best chance to consistently establish the run, as they say.
And the last bit of news from the final preseason game is one that admittedly threw me for a loop, because what we saw from David Montgomery was him playing 20 of 22 first-string snaps with Justin Fields. Khalil Herbert, who was injured in the game prior in week 2 of the preseason, wasn't inactive. He was available in this game, and he stepped in for those 2 snaps, literally just to relieve Montgomery, with Montgomery also getting all 3 third down snaps on passing downs in particular. So, Paulsen, does this move the rankings for you for Montgomery, who, again, sits in that dead zone, or in the spot before the tier drops off to Elijah Mitchell range?
Yeah, I mean, heading into this offseason, I thought that David Montgomery, late 4th, 5th round ADP was a really nice value, given the fact that he had averaged 20 plus touches in back-to-back seasons. And as you know, I follow the touches when it comes to my running back rankings. And, even though that the Bears are going to not be very good in terms of the offense and number of touchdowns scored and the offensive line stinks and all that, you still, if you're getting 20 plus touches, it's hard not to produce fantasy starter type numbers. So I was not, he was not, I just kept avoiding him when, in those rounds. There's always a receiver on the board I'd way rather have than David Montgomery. He's been kind of sliding into that 5th, 6th, sometimes 7th round, especially on the heels of this Khalil Herbert discussion that they were going to do more of a committee. But, he did some work with Montgomery did some work with the special teams for briefly. But as you mentioned, this last preseason game played 20 of 22 snaps with Justin Fields, which indicates that he's kind of back in his primetime role. So I did ratchet down his projection, but he didn't drop a lot in the rankings because there was a distance there between him and the next player or two. So I have a problem with the next guy, Travis Etienne, and AJ Dillon's in a timeshare below him. So it's not like any of these guys are really nipping at his heels from a workload standpoint. So he's not a guy that I've been targeting. And at this point, it just sort of depends on where he falls in the draft and if I need a running back. I do think that at this point, it looks like he's going to see that 18 to 20 touch per game floor, which is nice to have even in a bad offense.
And I would argue, Pat, that Montgomery's ceiling, whatever that may be, is still available in home leagues. He typically doesn't budge from the 5th round, same as FFPC leagues, whereas, like Paulsen mentioned, ETN, I would argue the ceiling, the juice is squeezed out of ETN because he goes at the 2nd, 3rd round turn pretty consistently in FFPC leagues, whereas home leagues, like that's a player that usually dips 2 rounds later.
Right. And you and I saw this in our draft last week where this was a draft in Chicago with a bunch of Chicago area guys, and no one, like Montgomery was a hot potato in this draft. I think he wound up going, running back 22 or 23. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting John mentioned A.J. Dillon. So I'm definitely drafting Travis Etienne ahead of David Montgomery, but I've been debating the Montgomery versus Dillon thing for a while now. And when there was a question about Montgomery's role and whether this new regime was committed to using him in something close to the role he had last year, I think you had to go with Montgomery over Dillon. But when there was some ambiguity and maybe the possibility that Khalil Herbert was going to get a fairly significant role and maybe it was going to be 60-40 or 55-45, then you want Dillon because he's in a much better offense. The Bears' offensive line might be the worst in the league, and they're not going to score many touchdowns. But, as John said, if Montgomery's getting that heavy usage, he's still a worthwhile asset. So it's just the signals have been so mixed. I mean, he was doing some special teams work a few weeks ago. Now all of a sudden he's getting this massive percentage of snaps with the first team. So really mixed signals here. I think I've got him back up at running back 17 or 18. But man, he's, in all honesty, in my upcoming drafts, he's a guy I'm kind of drafting around.
I completely agree. He makes for an interesting argument, especially now that if you wait a couple rounds, you get Chase Edmonds again, who we're higher on, and Antonio Gibson, who is slipping in home league still, but we know is now boosting up for, as we mentioned, his role from last year. A couple quick hitters before we get out of here, and we'll definitely discuss all of these more in depth before week 1, because matchups is where these fallouts are more important. But Kenyan Drake was signed to Baltimore's backfield alongside Mike Davis as an ominous sign that J.K. Dobbins doesn't really appear ready to go for week 1. The team, of course, also released rookie Tyler Beatty, even though they re-signed him to the practice squad. But right now, it seems like a toss-up, Paulsen, between Kenyan Drake, Mike Davis. Last round today, you're in a deep league, 2 flexes, let's say. Someone wants to draft one of them. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, actually, Adam Hutchinson was asking, our injury guy. He and I are chatting pretty regularly now because trying to figure out how long these players are going to be out with injury, et cetera. And he was asking about this. Does this change Mike Davis's outlook? And it certainly does. I mean, if you look at PFF grades are just one piece of the puzzle, but I just looked up Drake's rushing grade, his receiving grade, and his pass blocking grade, and they were all well ahead of Mike Davis's last year. So according to PFF, he's still a much better player. Watching Drake in Las Vegas, he just hasn't looked like he was the explosive player that we saw for a stretch there in Arizona. So I just don't know. I feel like he might have lost a step. But I think in this situation, if we've seen what Baltimore does, if they are going to bring Dobbins along slowly, or if he's not going to be active week 1 or in September or something like that, they could very well like ride Drake if he's getting going at all. And because he is a pretty good pass catcher as well, even though they don't use running backs in the passing game too much. He could get you 3 or 4 starts in September before Dobbins comes back. And I think in that situation, it's Dobbins and Drake before Edwards comes back. I think Davis is probably the fact that they had him and they brought Drake in. I think that indicates they're looking to upgrade on Davis. And I think Drake is an upgrade on Davis.
Any other preferences for you there, Pat?
Drake for Davis over me, although I do have this nagging worry that like maybe Davis is a better stylistic fit for the Ravens as like maybe a more physical type of runner. I do think Drake's the better guy. And as I don't know if any of the Justice Hill truthers out there have any hope left, but I don't know. It's such a messy situation, but like it gives Drake a little bit of hope. Maybe he could be a viable play in the first month or so of the season until Dobbins gets rolling.
And Justice Hill does remain on the active roster. I mentioned quick hits, but let's stop down for this one really quick too, because Paulsen, the Broncos cut their blocking tight end, Eric Tomlinson, and moved rookie Greg Dulcich to IR for the first 4 games guaranteed, which tells us that if Albert O isn't on the field for basically every snap, that's an Albert O problem, not a coaching staff problem.
Albert O has been, I don't know. This has been wild watching him this offseason. I mean, I was so excited about the breakout early this summer. He's getting all the snaps with Noah Fant moving on, and getting a quarterback upgrade with Russell Wilson. And then there was Russell Wilson doesn't throw to his tight ends except for Jimmy Graham, who is very much like Albert O and physically. And Albert O might even be faster. I think he is. To a point where, Greg Dulchich, they love him. They want him to be the guy. And all of a sudden, Albert O has these warts, and he's not looking like a breakout. And then you get into the preseason, and he's playing in the fourth quarter, and the head coach says, yeah, he needs reps. And so now we're like all-time low on Albert O. He's dropping even further in drafts. You can get him in the 12th, 13th, 14th round, whereas he was kind of pushing the top 10 round status earlier in the summer. And all of a sudden now he sits out the last preseason game, which shows that they saw what they needed to see from him. He, quote unquote, doesn't need reps anymore, apparently. And they put Dulcich on IR, which means he's going to miss at least the first 4 games with a hamstring injury. He's going to be behind. He's a rookie. We know rookie tight ends don't produce in fantasy anyway, generally speaking. Kyle Pitts was the exception to that rule. So I think, Albert O has a chance now to start to play 80% plus snaps. He's a good receiver. He was number 6 in yards per route run last year. He was number 8 as a rookie, but didn't have enough targets to qualify PFF. So two straight years of showing really high efficiency on his routes, getting open, earning yards. And he's playing with a good quarterback. Tim Patrick is out for the year. So we have more red zone opportunities, more touchdowns opportunities available because Patrick was a touchdown catcher for them. So I'm getting back on board with the Albert O breakout season. Let's go. What do you say, Pat?
Yeah, I'm never going to fall out of love with a tight end who has that sort of athleticism and those sorts of measurables. Like, John, we were DMing earlier today about David Njoku, who's like let me down more times than I care to count. I still want to get back on him. So I'm with you. My enthusiasm. It's been a roller coaster couple of weeks here with Albert O, but yeah, let's ride.
Albert O went from one of my favorite late round tight ends to prioritize to me holding the bag to back in good graces. And even if this means I was lucky, not right, I'm fine with that. I'll gladly backdoor win any way I can. Now quick hits that we'll talk about more in depth ahead of week 1 next week when the regular season pod schedule commences. Russell Gage, questionable for week 1. Pretty huge considering we also don't expect Chris Godwin to be a full-time player. More on that next week when we talk about rankings. David Njoku, who you mentioned, Pat, 39 to 42 first-string snaps this preseason. A real and legitimate chance he leads the Browns in targets as like Alberto, one of my favorite late round tight ends throughout the summer. And then, of course, we saw my other late round favorite, Mo Alley Cox, play all 13 first string snaps with Matt Ryan. Those are the three guys at tight end I'm prioritizing. And that, I think, wraps up the preseason news that we've received over the last month. Anything that I might have missed, remember, go to 44.com and check out Paulsen's rankings change log that will continue to be updated throughout the holiday. Let's take a quick break and come right back with our final draft strategy thoughts for the 2022 season. Right now, if you sign up at Underdog as a new subscriber, not only will you receive a free pro subscription to 4for4 with access to all of our off-season content, including our around-the-clock Discord conversations, Underdog will also match your deposit up to $100 by 100%. Literally mirror it. And there are no catches. Just download the Underdog app, use the promo code 4for4 when depositing. That's the number 4, word, the number again, and presto. The holiday weekend will be the heaviest fantasy football draft weekend of the entire year. That's why I think it's important we all go around the table and discuss after we've all took part in our own fantasy drafts over the last month, what we think are the most important strategies to know before everyone enters their draft. And I actually want to start off, Pat, because the question I've received the most and the conundrum I have run into the most in the last month is, what do you do with the 5th overall pick once JT, CMC, Cooper Kupp, and Justin Jefferson off the board? Because then the world is your oyster. You can go Jamar Chase or Stephon Diggs, or you can go Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, another running back of your choice. It seems to be a popular question. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts, what you were doing personally with the 5th overall pick, knowing that those top 4 players are the first 4 players taken.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this, and it leads nicely to something that I've been emphasizing with a lot of my followers and a lot of Fantasy Pro subscribers, and it's that the difference between whether you are required to start 2 wide receivers every week and 3 wide receivers every week is so massive. Like, there's this misconception that wide receiver is really deep. And maybe it is if you only have to start 2 every week. But if you have to start 3 wide receivers every week in a 12-team league, and they're going to be 36 wideouts, plus however many flex guys, suddenly you'll find that the wide receiver position is not nearly as deep as maybe you thought it was in draft season when you're trying to shoehorn Jarvis Landry into your starting lineup every week. And so that matters a lot. And if it's a 3 wide receiver league, I am taking Chase there, snap call, no hesitation whatsoever. He's still in play for me in a 2 wide receiver league, although then it's a tougher call, I think, for me between Chase and Dalvin Cook.
And what I like about 3 wide receiver leagues in particular, Paulsen, is that I'm not even saying drafting Chase or Diggs there is correct at 5th overall over Austin Eckler, Dalvin Cook, whomever else, but it does give you ways to backdoor different lineups. Like, you can still set yourself up for an anchor RB build with Saquon Barkley, DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones, or Alvin Kamara if they happen to fall. Not if the back end of the draft is RB heavy. You know your league mates better than we do, but you can still backdoor an anchor RB build, even if it means reaching a few spots for Leonard Fournette, and then continue hammering wide receiver from that point forward through the 6th, 7th round. What are your thoughts of the 5th overall pick?
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum with the, pick 5 through pick 7, like which way do you go there? And I think for me, the 2nd round receivers that are available mid-second to late 2nd, and I'm talking about Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans. I'm a little leery about using 2nd round draft capital on those guys, just given their respective situations, as quarterback change, team change. Mike Evans looked like he was going to see a ton of targets. We don't know now with Godwin, likely back early, and Julio Jones in there. So what I feel a little uncomfortable with is drafting an Eckler. Not that I don't like Eckler or Henry at 5, and then coming back and who am I taking in the 2nd round? I've been trying to go hero RB, anchor RB, whatever your phrase is for it. Mm-hmm. So I don't really want to start running back, although it's okay, because that leaves me behind either at tight end or receiver. It's still sort of doable, maybe a Pitts in the third after 2 running backs, and then you hit receiver starting in the fourth. But you're, as Pat mentioned, the number of receivers that you're starting is key there, because you're wanting to go receiver for probably 4 straight rounds in that situation. And there are good receivers into the 7th round, but I think the drop off at receiver is 6th. So I'm trying to go hero. I'd probably be more inclined in that situation to draft a receiver in that first round. Target an Aaron Jones in the middle of the 2nd round, somebody like that. Maybe get a Pitts in the 3rd, and then go receiver for 3 straight rounds there, 4, 5, and 6, to round out a 4-player receiving core that's going to be really strong. I mean, you might have, Adam Thielen as your fourth receiver, who was the number 7 fantasy receiver before he got injured last year in week 12. So that's sort of where I'm going, and then I'm trying to turn that around into round 7 with Chase Edmonds as my RB2, and usually that works out.
And I will just note for everyone that we're playing odds, because I do think you can definitely get away and still have a strong start and team with an RB start from the middle in 3 wide receiver starting leagues. But you start playing with fire at that point, because even in the next 15 receivers, right, all being the same guys, like from Amon-Ra St. Brown to Mike Evans, who's to say Mike Evans outscores Amon-Ra St. Brown? It's possible, though, not to get one of those, like 15 guys, as your starter, as your wide receiver 3. And then you get into the Michael Thomas, Adam Thielen, Devonta Smith range, which I'm fine with, but it's not as strong as the other guys up front if you start RB. So I would just play the odds correctly. And again, your leagues better than we do. Pat, what about your first draft strategy thought?
Can I just piggyback on something you were just saying, John, about that RB start? And maybe this can kind of segue into the other point I was going to make about draft strategy. So if you do that, then you are really beholden to catching up at wide receiver. Like you have to play catch up. And the pull for me this year to take either a luxury tight end or a luxury quarterback is as strong as I've felt it in a long time. And, I feel like I want one of those things. And generally my strategy is that, it's okay to take either a luxury tight end or a luxury quarterback, but generally not both, because then you fall too far behind at either running back or wide receiver. And if you start running back, man, it's going to cost you if you chase a luxury quarterback or a luxury tight end, because you're going to be trying to play catch up at wide receiver. And, if you pause the game of catch up to take one of those positions, you're going to fall hopelessly behind at wide receiver, I think, in a 3 wide receiver league. So, but that is kind of a big tactical point for me. I generally don't like to take, an early an early tight end and an early quarterback. They're leagues where, generally I think in a draft, if you see someone who takes a top 3 quarterback and a top 3 tight end, generally that person is not going to win that league for the most part. I've always felt like that's one way to identify the sucker in the room. But, I am perfectly happy with going with one luxury guy at either of those positions.
I do think there's a way to do it. If you're looking at maybe a Hurts or a Kyler in the 6th, I mean, John, you mentioned that earlier. That's one of your targets, right? And if you maybe look at Andrews in the 2nd, so let's build around the 2nd and the 6th with 2 luxury picks. Those would be 2 luxury picks, I think. Not top 3, not a Josh Allen, but a Hurts in the 6th, Andrews in the 2nd. You could draft a running back in the 1st, and then you're going receiver like a Pittman in the 3rd, a McLaurin in the 4th, DK Metcalf type, Bateman, I don't know, your St. Brown, pick your fifth round player. And then, Chase Edmonds in the 7th. So you do have 3 good receivers there. And then maybe you're looking to round out your receiving core a little bit earlier, 8th, 9th. Like, to me, the reason I am responding to that is because Tyler Lockett's going in the 9th round. Easy to get him. I love Isaiah McKenzie in the 12th round, 11th, 12th round. I think he'll be a fantasy starter. We both have talked about Romeo Doubs in DM. Is there upside there? Maybe 10th, 11th round. I think there is a way to get some players later in the draft that are going to end up being starters for you if you're okay with your fourth receiver, the guy that you're rotating in after when your guys are on bye or if they're injured, your top three receivers. If you can find some upside there and some guys that might be emerging for breakout seasons.
My only issue, this may not be an issue, but my only thought I keep coming back to when I draft like that is this is why Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts are kind of at the forefront of my plan in the 6th, 7th round. And they go so close together that usually when you're in the middle, if you skip that row, you're going to miss them both. They won't come back to you. But even though if I start a running back in the first 2 rounds and then I start asking myself, when do I want to avert the plan? When do I want to grab my second running back? I usually just end up waiting even longer than the Chase Edmonds and Ramondre Stevensons of the world, because I almost think it's like a fantasy football criminal to avoid the upside and potential winning and league winning potential at a onesie position of Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts with the rushing upside than it is to avert the plan for a running back 2 we're higher on, like Chase Edmonds or Ramondre Stevenson. Like structurally, I don't want to do that. And so definitely if they fall to the next round, if I have one of Murray or Hurts, or as we talked about earlier, leaving Hurts and Murray on the board and waiting for Lance, that's when I like grabbing the RB2s. But I hate averting the plan in the middle rounds for an RB2 whenever, as you said, Pat, a luxury pick is still there, and we know we can get away with one if we do analyze them with high upside. Paulsen, what about your first draft strategy thought?
Well, I mean, I kind of gone over it, a few times in different podcasts and on the site, but I'm definitely taking sort of a hero RB approach. But I think this year you can get away with even a hero RB build in the 3rd round with James Conner. I think he's going to get a lot of touches in Arizona. He's going at the end of the 3rd round. You might even be able to get away with it with Ezekiel Elliott, who's usually a top 5 fantasy pick, but he's going in the 3rd, 4th round. I don't know about home leagues. I think that they're going to be a little bit higher on Zeke just from name recognition and maybe Connor as well. But if you wanted to start wide receiver, tight end, you could go Connor in the 3rd and then back to your plan. But I think you need one running back in those first 3 rounds. And then you kind of ignore the position until Chase Edmonds in the 7th. You could go longer, like you said, John, and even just play running back 2 by committee and target guys like, Darrell Henderson or Nyheim Hines and hope that one eventually, emerges by injury or some other way. But with one anchor running back, Edmonds at the 2, a stud tight end like Andrews and Pitts, and then 4 of those middle round receivers. That's a really appealing build to me heading into maybe the 8th, 9th round when I'm starting to look at guys like Tyler Lockett to round out my receiving core.
Your thoughts, Pat?
Yeah, maybe I should walk back the thing I said about taking the 2 because really I don't consider if you can get them in the 6th or the 7th. I don't think Hurts and Kyler Murray are luxury picks at that point. I think they are value picks, and that's big because I have been increasingly finding myself taking either Andrews or Pitts in drafts, and if you can get one of the top quarterbacks that late, that's great. But if I am going to do that and cut corners somewhere else, it's probably going to be, as you said, John, on the running back 2. Like I'm willing to wait and just play it with some of the guys you mentioned, Tony Pollard or Nyheim Hines or Darrell Henderson. Like those guys are appealing options, and if you can get like 2, 3 of those guys plus a couple late round dart throws, I think you can make that work.
Yeah, I would add Rashad Penny to that list too. Like he's likely to get off to a strong start. Not the greatest offense, but I mean, Rashad Penny and Dameon Pierce really aren't in that different of situations. Bad offenses. We've seen Penny run the ball. We know he's good. I think the issue is Walker, kind of looming, coming off some sort of sports hernia injury or something like that. But Penny, Cordero Patterson's available late. Devin Singletary's been getting all the first team reps pretty much in the preseason, and of course Damian Harris. We talked about him earlier. It was like a 9th round pick. Those guys could serve as your RB2 if you wanted to punt that position, so to speak, and just sort of wait and load up elsewhere. And the other player I want to mention is Aaron Rodgers. I'm a Packer fan. He's the back-to-back MVP. He's going QB 14 in some of these drafts. And if you don't get a Hurts or a Murray or even a Lance, John, he is so cheap for what his history of production. And I don't think that the loss of Devontae Adams is going to hamstring him as much as that draft capital or ADP would seem to indicate. So if you can add him in the 10th round to a team that's got 9 good players on it already, that's a pretty powerful start as well.
And also to your point, Pat, we say do not avert the strategy for luxury picks. However, right now we've seen with the news shakeup in the last 3-4 days alone that I want to emphasize you should scroll down and queue and star Dameon Pierce, Antonio Gibson, Chase Edmonds, J.D. McKissic, and, to Paulsen's point, Rashad Penny, because those are arguably the 5 biggest risers based on personnel situations. Ken Walker, Pete Carroll literally used the term uncharted territory for his hernia injury. If Ken Walker retired over the weekend, I don't think it'd be the most shocking thing that's ever come out of Seattle. So I'm worried about Ken Walker's 2-month stretch to open his career, let alone week 1. And thus we should be hammering Rashad Penny as an every touch running back, whether he's expected to lose a 3rd round role to Travis Homer or not. So yeah, those are players I definitely know I can get an ADP dip on, hoping and if my league mates are not as high on news as we are. Also, when I say my next draft strategy thought is one that's going to burn my mentions, because when I say averting strategy, common retort for FFPC leagues, high stakes leagues in particular, but this also goes for home leagues, is that everyone's excited to get Patrick Mahomes at his lowest ADP ever. But I think the big picture argument, the big picture question people should be asking is, do you want Patrick Mahomes in the 4th, 5th round? Again, whenever Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, and Trey Lance, who could easily outscore him with rushing upside alone, are available 2 to 3 rounds later. That's the argument you should be asking. And so I think averting the plan for Patrick Mahomes, and again, let's say the 4th round of home leagues, 3rd, 4th round, I think that's more costly than it is helpful. And that's something I don't want to do at all. Paulsen.
Go ahead, Pat.
Oh, I was just going to say that's a great point, that everyone gets excited when Mahomes sometimes falls past, often past Justin Herbert, and he's sitting there much later than we're used to seeing Patrick Mahomes sitting there. And it does blind us to the fact that there probably is better value later on with Murray, Hurts, or maybe even Lance.
Yeah, and I would say that same argument could be made for Aaron Rodgers. I hate to beat a dead horse, but he's going as late as we've ever seen him go, 9th, 10th round. If you want a really talented player, he is one. I think he'll be able to elevate the receivers that are on his team. Really efficient offense as well, and nobody more experienced other than maybe Tom Brady. So that's my second pitch for Aaron Rodgers.
Can I push back on John on that? A Packer fan pushing back on another Packers fan about
Aaron
Rodgers' enthusiasm. My only worry, John, is that this is probably the best Packers defense we've seen since Reggie White and Leroy Butler were roaming Lambeau Field. I just worry that the game scripts are not going to be good, and he doesn't have the top receiver. It's not only the Devontae absence that's frightening me about Rodgers, it's the potential that the defense is so good that they're playing in positive game scripts too often for... I think we're going to see a lot of games where Aaron Rodgers is 19 for 24 for 230 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is not great for fantasy.
Well, and I guess maybe 2 pitches for Rodgers was a bridge too far for Pat. That's understandable. I'm just looking at his last 2 seasons with Matt LaFleur. I mean, 4,300 yards, 48 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 4,100 yards, 37 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. And we do have, you mentioned the defense, and I think that's a valid point. They do play slow. So there are some situations where he might, if they have a couple of rushing touchdowns, he's not throwing for any, and they still win the game. And, he's got 170 yards, passing, and that's not great. But, maybe the defense isn't as good as we think it might be. Or he's just his normal self. I mean, he's a typical 30-plus touchdown guy, especially with LaFleur. And I think he's going to continue to play at a really high level. And, if we didn't have splits that showed either the same fantasy scoring or higher with Devontae sidelined, then I would be a little bit more concerned. But I think there might be a benefit to him that getting him out of locking on Adams and just reading the defense and hitting the open man. I think that we might even see his yards per attempt rise above his career average of 7.8 because he's able to maybe distribute the ball a little bit more instead of forcing it to his favorite guy. I get the slow pace argument, and I do get the might be their best defense and since the Reggie White years. And if that's the case and they're a shutdown defense, only have to score 14 points a game to win, then that certainly we're gonna have to move on from Aaron Rodgers and maybe stream the position. But at the cost of a 9th or 10th round pick, it's not you're taking a risk and you're not. It's not a whole lot of chips on the table. Like you can pivot from that to a streaming status strategy and be okay, I think.
I made the macro argument. I'll also say the micro argument no one really talks about is that whenever the Chiefs changed their offense to respond to 2 eye safeties over the second half of the season from week 7 on, Patrick Mahomes averaged just 18.5 fantasy points per game, literally 7 points fewer per week because they were a dump it off yak offense, which is what we expect them to be this year. Pat, your next draft strategy thought as we head into the weekend.
Oh man. I'm an old man, and there used to be a time, John, when drafting rookie wide receivers was kind of a sucker play, but I actually think rookie wide receivers have become a consistent value. Mm-hmm. And I think we're kind of poised to see that again with a little bit of the ambiguity we have with this rookie class and not knowing exactly which rookie wide receiver to grasp onto. But I think it's possible that a lot of them are values. I know Drake London is dealing with the knee issue. With maybe that keeps his ADP in check enough to make him a very nice value for this weekend's drafters because London is poised to have a pretty big target share as really the only other dependable target other than Kyle Pitts in the Atlanta offense. And Treylon Burks, who, like Antonio Gibson, has encountered just, one bit of bad news after another for much of the offseason, preseason training camp, but then looked really good in week 3 in the preseason. And I think maybe part of it is that it's just like, old school coaching thing where keeping the rookie in his place. And he's going to surprise us. I think Burks is another guy who could be in line for a big target share. And I like Chris Olave a lot in New Orleans and think he could be a guy who pairs really well with Jameis Winston, who likes to, throw those YOLO balls downfield. A lot of these guys, maybe Alec Pierce surprises us for the Colts. Just kind of up and down the board, I think there's value with these rookie wide receivers. Jahan Dotson's another guy I really like. Everyone fell in love with Pickens, but Dotson has quietly had this terrific camp and preseason and is playing all the snaps with the first team offense. So I don't think you want to load your shopping cart with 4 of these guys, but I think they are readily available at a good price and are going to be values in a lot of home league drafts.
Your thoughts on the rookie wide receiver since we're now done with the preseason, Paulsen?
Yeah, I would echo some of those thoughts. I mean, I think Olave is interesting from the standpoint of I think his upside's there because do you think that Michael Thomas is fully back and is going to play a full season and be the Michael Thomas of old? And if you're betting against that, then Olave, I think, is a prime candidate. He's going in the 8th, 9th round of fantasy drafts. I think people are a little bit a little worried justifiably about Jarvis Landry soaking up 6 or 7 targets a game, et cetera, and Michael Thomas coming back to his 10 target role. But reportedly, Olave looks great in camp, has a nice rapport with Winston, as Pat mentioned. Downfield threat is excellent there with Winston and Olave, that connection. I think he covered the players that are likely to start or to be playing 3 wide receiver sets. Dotson looks like he's going to be on 2 wide receiver sets, so he's going to play a lot of snaps. Now, his quarterback situation isn't great, and he's also competing with Terry McLaurin for targets, and Curtis Samuel's back as well. So I have him, wide receiver 50, but reportedly he looks great. I just think it's going to be a problem with consistent targets. And then the only player he didn't mention, but we talked about him before, is Romeo Doubs. I do think that he finds his way into the starting lineup sooner rather than later, just based on the steady drumbeat of positive news. Just one little hiccup there with a drop in practice or 2 drops in practice, and Rodgers calling him out or calling all the rookies out. And then apparently he's back. He was back to what he had been doing, and I don't think he's out of the starting lineup for too long, given the camp that he's had. But Pickens is a good call. He's probably going to be finish higher than Claypool, I think, in receiving yards and targets. And then, Garrett Wilson is sort of the wild card along with Sky Moore. Wilson, I don't know that he's even going to be playing in 3 receiver sets. He might be behind Berrios, obviously in the slot, because Berrios is a slot receiver and Wilson isn't. And then does he remain behind Corey Davis? Wilson's camp's been very up and down reportedly. We know Elijah Moore is Elijah Moore, and he's going to probably be the number 1 receiver there. And then Sky Moore is the other guy. Like, we saw a lot of cool highlights of him carrying the ball out of the backfield. He's paired with one of the best quarterbacks in the league, if not the best. But he, his playing time in the preseason has been wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 stuff. He might be behind Mecole Hardman. He might be behind Justin Watson. We just don't know. I like to bet on talent with Sky Moore because he looks like he's a really talented guy, but the playing time doesn't appear to be there at the start of the year. A lot of these guys are going to that maybe struggle in the first few weeks and might get cut. Fantasy managers should be aware, maybe pick them up because second half of the season is typically when these struggling rookies really start to shine.
That's really the concern for redraft leagues is how long do you have the courage to hold Sky Moore? Garrett Wilson, who only played 2 first-string snaps in the preseason behind Braxton Berrios, who, remember, they gave a 2-year, $12 million deal to be their efficient underneath slot receiver. And Chris Olave, boomer bust option, I think. Jalen Tolbert steps right into the role. But, yeah, redraft leagues, it's much harder to pin those guys than it is best ball, which is why we've been higher on them at dipping ADPs. Much tougher in redraft. Paulsen, your final draft strategy before we head into the holiday of weekend drafts.
Well, I've been writing my, last weekend, final thoughts for the last draft weekend. And, we touched on Antonio Gibson, what to do with him. We touched on Dameon Pierce. We touched on Kenyan Drake. And we touched on Albert O. And maybe the 2 situations that we just want to touch on, Michael Carter, perhaps still the starter with the Jets, which is surprising. I think everybody in the fantasy community thought that Breece Hall would have this job won by now, clearly, given the draft capital that the Jets used. But he has struggled at camp. However, the last week or so, splitting first-team reps with Carter, this looks like it's going to be what we saw last year. They cut Tevin Coleman, but it might just be a 1A, 1B situation, and Carter might be the starter, and in which case he's the better value. There's about 89 pick difference right now, 7 rounds between Breece Hall and Carter. Now, Hall could win the job as the season goes on, but I think Carter's pretty good. So, we'll see what happens there. And the other situation, Chris Godwin and Michael Gallup coming back from ACLs, we thought that they might be on PUP and miss the first month of the season at least, maybe come back mid-season. They're both ahead of schedule. Godwin is suddenly looking like a great value in the 5th round. He's in the 6th round sometimes, that 5-6 turn a lot. And then Gallup really is an afterthought in a lot of these drafts. He's still on the board in a couple of my drafts well into the double-digit rounds. And, he averaged 57 yards with Dak Prescott in 14 games over the past 2 seasons, along with 0.21 touchdowns, 2.7 catches. And that was being the third option in that offense. And now with Amari Cooper gone, once Gallup is up to speed, he should be the number 2 option there and maybe increase those numbers to maybe instead of 3.7 for 57, maybe we get a 4.7 for 68 or 69 yards. Maybe we get another quarter of a touchdown, something like that. And he's a fantasy starter. These are players that can help you in the second half of your seasons, especially Godwin and Gallup, because they're going to be over those knee injuries. And by November, by December, they should be posting really good numbers.
Your thoughts, Pat?
So I have been scooping up Godwin a lot lately. And maybe this is too narrative driven, but I feel like with these issues the Buccaneers are having in the middle of the offensive line, that once Godwin gets out there for more than partial snaps, he's going to be really valuable because Brady is going to want to find him on those quick hitters. I'm much more worried about how the Buccaneers' offensive line problems affect Mike Evans and his 13-yard average depth of target from last year. Like, you need time to be able to get that. And, Brady does not like pressure up the middle. And these injury issues and defections and retirements they've had with the middle of the offensive line, I think could be problematic, but not so much for Godwin. And his ADP is not recovered yet. So I've been scooping him up a lot, and I think John makes some good points with some of these other guys. Gallop a value now too in the later rounds.
I have personally also been considering Godwin in the Amon-Ra St. Brown tier around or ahead of Michael Thomas, knowing that, sure, maybe not a full-time player in the first month of the season, but someone that honestly, if he was healthy, would probably be getting drafted around Mike Evans' range right now. So it's a discount I'm willing to ride. And just make sure you keep an eye on those players like an Isaiah McKenzie as well, who we think we can use for a little bit of time as bridges, as building blocks to our contingency values on our bench. Rondale Moore was like my favorite in the first 6 weeks, especially because the Cardinals open with 3 50-plus point totals in Vegas Sportsbook for the first 3 weeks, and Moore, we think, has that starting slot role for the first 6 games. But now, as we'll talk about beginning next week, Rondale Moore's battling an injury and may not even be available for week 1. So now we get into the matchup analysis part of the regular season. Pat, until then, tell everyone where they can find you.
People can get me at fantasypros.com. They can find me on the Fitz on Fantasy podcast every week and on Twitter at Fitz_FF. Paulsen, always great to see you again, my friend. Daigle, great to see you too, buddy, and look forward to teeing it up in a couple weeks, even though I couldn't find a fairway with the Seeing Eye Dog. We'll still go out there and have some fun.
Paulsen, any final thoughts?
We have breaking news that Trey Sermon was cut about 6 minutes ago, reported by Field Yates. Which is an interesting. Oops. I don't know if either one of you want to comment on that, but that he had a pretty good preseason. But showing confidence in Elijah Mitchell, and obviously they got a couple Jeff Wilson, and they got the rookie there, so maybe a little bump for them as well. As far as my latest article will be up soon. It's the final thoughts for the last draft weekend, and that's my last article prior to the season starting. And we should have that up hopefully by tomorrow afternoon.
And remember, regular season TMAP schedule beginning next week, including a waiver wire pod. There will be on a column on the site by Monday night, Tuesday morning. We'll see what everyone wants for the holidays. We'll see what the corporate says when it should be released. But look forward on the site. Until then, thank you for everyone for joining. We finally made it through the off season, and be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.